Think America is untouchable in a nuclear war? You might want to sit down because you're already in the blast zone. The US spends more on nuclear maintenance than Russia did on its entire military before invading Ukraine, giving Americans a false sense of security. But as global tensions rise, the truth is grim. Russia and China have nukes aimed at various parts of the US. So, how long would you survive, depending on where you live? The United States can be broken down into 5 key regions: the Pacific Coast, the Great Plains, the Midwest, the South, and the Northeastern Seaboard. These aren't just geographical zones, they're the backbone of America's military, economic, and political power. And in the event of a nuclear war, they become the most valuable and the most vulnerable targets. And that is where nuclear targeting strategy comes in. There are 2 main approaches to this: counterforce and countervalue. If you've ever wondered why Russia and the US, and soon China, field an insane number of nuclear weapons, you're about to find out. Counterforce targeting isn't about hitting cities, it's about taking out the enemy's ability to fight back. That means going straight for the nuclear infrastructure, things like missile silos, air bases, submarine pens, and mobile launchers. For example, the United States has Russia's fixed nuclear silos locked in as targets, but it also targets Russia's mobile missile systems. And that is a lot of targets. But it gets worse. Both the US and Russia don't just want to destroy enemy silos, they want to annihilate them all and fast. And that's why missile silos are deliberately spaced far apart, typically at least 1.5 miles. A single nuke can't take out more than one, forcing the enemy to launch multiple warheads in a saturation strike just to be sure. America's vast missile fields spanning across the heartland have been called missile sponges for a reason. Their job is to soak up hundreds of Russian nukes, and this spares other targets. Counterforce targeting, though, also includes command and control infrastructure that keeps the nation's arsenal connected and responsive. It also targets early warning radar, strategic bomber bases, and home ports for America's and Russia's nuclear submarine fleets. In case of all-out doomsday, counterforce targeting would also include concentrations of conventional power. These are military installations that don't have nuclear weapons, but could be used in an ensuing conventional war following the nuclear strikes. Think troop formations, air bases, and naval assets. America's military presence in Europe, for example, is a deterrent against Russian aggression against NATO, but it also puts NATO nations at risk of a nuclear attack. Home bases, though, here in the mainland are also under nuclear threats, especially important facilities such as Fort Benning in Georgia, a crucial base for various U.S. Army specialties to train at. Counter-value targeting are nuclear attacks meant to reduce the enemy's ability to recover and pose a future threat. You're likely familiar with the fact that if you live in a big city in the U.S., you're under threat of a nuclear attack. But it's not just cities that make up counter-value targets. In fact, in some types of nuclear war, these would be the last to be hit. Major industrial hubs such as the Los Angeles and Long Beach ports, AI data centers, and even farmland are all counter-value targets. The destruction of these targets and the poisoning of the territory they inhabit is meant to deliver a crippling blow to the U.S. economy. That ensures that no matter what happens in this war, the U.S. will take decades, if not longer, before it's capable of fighting the next. Modern Russian nuclear doctrine has changed somewhat, but it still largely resembles the Soviet Union's. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union's nuclear doctrine differed dramatically from the US's. The Soviets didn't see nuclear weapons as tools of deterrence, but rather as weapons meant to be used in the next great conflict. That meant, unlike America, the Soviet Union focused heavily on counterforce targeting, even keeping weapons in reserve for further military strikes rather than hitting US cities. The Soviets believed that any conflict with NATO would inevitably become nuclear, largely because they understood that conventionally they significantly outmuscled NATO. The US all but publicly declared that it would use nuclear weapons in the opening stages of an invasion of West Germany, reinforcing the view that Soviet nukes would be used as war-winning tools. Counter-value targeting, meanwhile, was reserved for niche or escalatory scenarios. While the US was fully prepared to nuke every major Soviet city at the start of a nuclear exchange, the Soviets saw their counter-value nuclear weapons as being used in limited nuclear war, a low-scale exchange between the East and West, incinerating 2 cities in retaliation for the enemy striking one. It was hoped that escalation would allow both sides to achieve political objectives without breaking into a full doomsday war. However, in case a conventional war did not go the Soviet Union's way, they also saw counter-value targeting as a means to force Western forces into capitulation, hurling nuclear weapons at cities in order to crush the civilian population's will to continue fighting. Even the use of smaller tactical-scale nuclear weapons are seen as a natural part of the opening days of a conflict. Short-range weapons would be launched by missile or aircraft, or even Spetsnaz forces on key NATO concentrations. The United States, meanwhile, was also committed to using tactical nuclear weapons, but only as a last resort if conventional resistance failed. U.S. Special Forces were likewise trained to infiltrate into the Eastern Bloc and use tactical weapons to detonate key road and rail infrastructure, bridges, and tunnels. Where Russia's modern nuclear doctrine diverges from the old Soviet mindset is with the modernization of nuclear weapons. Smaller arsenal but greater flexibility and capability. Given Russia's ever-weakening geopolitical position, the nation has also adopted an escalate to de-escalate strategy. It's the idea of using limited nuclear strikes to freeze a conventional war that Russia knows it can't win by traditional means. Rather than waiting for the nukes to fly on both sides, Russia might go nuclear first, not to win outright but to force the enemy into backing off. With the ever-expanding fleets of fifth-generation aircraft amongst NATO forces, it's easy to see why Moscow puts less trust in its aging conventional forces and more faith in its warheads. But if the gloves come off, it's game over for everyone. First up is the Pacific, stretching from Mexico all the way up to the Canadian border. America's western seaboard is of critical military and economic importance, which is why it'll face severe nuclear wrath in the case of an all-out war. In California, you have the all-important cultural and economic centers of Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. The Bay Area is a prime target due to its high concentration of tech companies, which have become as strategic a target in the modern age as traditional industry. Los Angeles is important for its population, its cultural significance due to Hollywood, and the Los Angeles and Long Beach ports, which account for as much as a third of all U.S. imports depending on the year. San Diego, meanwhile, is both culturally and militarily significant due to the largest naval base on the West Coast being located there. Oregon and Washington have less nuclear targets, but are still under the threat of nuclear attack due to large port facilities, which would be crucial in shutting down U.S. trade. Seattle especially is a high-priority target due to being another major tech hub of U.S. industry, as well as the location of specialized naval warfare infrastructure. The Seattle and Tacoma area also has major oil refineries, while the Bonneville Dam on the Columbia River provides electricity across the region. As far as military targets, the West Coast is full of critical naval infrastructure, such as submarine and aircraft carrier bases. Inland, though, is Edwards Air Force Base, renowned for being a hub for advanced experimental aircraft flight testing and a major hub for U.S. aerospace operations. China Lake Naval Air Weapons Station, meanwhile, carries out research and development for cutting-edge Navy systems. Coronado hosts much of the West Coast's naval aviation, and it's home to several SEAL teams. You may live nowhere near the West Coast, but with so many critical targets, you're gonna feel the devastation if America's Pacific ports are permanently destroyed. Overseas supply chains would be choked up, and prices would skyrocket on everything from food and fuel to medications. And even if you're on the East Coast, odds are that the car you drive or the clothes you wear made its way to you via the West Coast. From a military standpoint, losing West Coast air bases and naval stations would be a crippling blow to U.S. military power. If America's Pacific naval air bases are destroyed, its ability to project power into the Pacific is crippled. Counter-value attacks against the rich farmlands of Southern California means that parts of the fruits and vegetable supply chain will disappear forever, causing scarcity and prices to soar. If you like oranges, bad news. California produces more than double the amount of second-place Florida, 45.8 million oranges versus Florida's 20.5 million. America's Great Plains states are known for their vast open expanses. If you've ever been, it can feel like the land goes on forever. But even as big as the Great Plains are, they're going to become a nuclear nightmare in the case of an all-out war. First up, you've got the most obvious targets, America's vast swaths of nuclear missile fields. They weren't built there by accident. The U.S. took a hard look at all the available property, and they decided that the Great Plains were expendable. America's missile fields aren't really meant to survive a full-scale attack. They just soak up as many enemy warheads as possible. By forcing an adversary like Russia to burn through hundreds of nukes just to take them out, they protect more critical targets and keep the U.S. nuclear deterrent in play, at least long enough to retaliate. So that's bad news for Montana, Wyoming, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Colorado. Due to dispersion of silos, each field could see as many as 100 nukes to ensure their full destruction. This would very quickly make America's Great Plains the most irradiated territory in the entire country. With prodigious winds, all that radiation would be blown eastward, causing massive toxic clouds of fallout to rain across the Midwest and even the East Coast. Anyone in the vicinity of the following locations will suffer the worst of it. The Malmstrom Air Force Base missile field stretches across northern Montana. This was a primary target of Soviet nuclear forces who counted on an attack over the North Pole to eradicate America's counterstrike abilities. The missile fields at Malmstrom stretch east and west of the base, even into the Lewis and Clark National Forest. Dozens of communities find themselves nestled between the silos containing the most powerful and dangerous weapons known to man. F.E. Warren Air Force Base's missile field stretches for hundreds of square miles across Wyoming and into northern Colorado and western Nebraska. As the Soviet arsenal expanded, the U.S. knew it needed to reinforce its ground-based deterrence, but even more importantly, force the Soviets to target more missiles into relatively empty terrain rather than major military or civilian targets. Unfortunately, the area has seen significant expansion in modern times, putting hundreds of thousands of people at risk from what used to be America's nuclear sponge. Minot Air Force Base hosts both a large missile field that stretches across North Dakota and it's home to a nuclear bomber wing made up of B-52 aircraft. This is a double whammy for the local area, and it makes it an even higher priority target due to the presence of two of the three legs of the nuclear triad. It was from Minot, and it could be again in the future, where America's nuclear retaliation begins, though with flights directly over the North Pole and into Russian territory. Modern standoff nuclear cruise missiles allow even non-stealthy B-52s to get close enough to rain destruction down on a modern Russia. South Dakota isn't any safer, given that it hosts Ellsworth Air Force Base, currently home to nuclear-capable B-1B Lancers. The base is slated to receive the new B-21 Raider with a nuclear mission. But the Great Plains also host a lot of important agricultural land. From cattle to wheat, the Great Plains states help make America one of the largest exporters of both, leading some to call the U.S. the breadbasket of the world. To destroy America's economy and dissolve its government, nuclear strikes against farmland using ground-burst weapons would spread trillions of tons of contaminated soil all across the landscape. Some of the most productive farmland in the world would turn into a worthless wasteland. Key civilian targets in the region are rarer than other parts of the country due to the low population, but there are still at least 3 cities guaranteed to experience nuclear annihilation. Omaha, Nebraska was once of highest priority targeting during the Cold War due to being home to the Strategic Air Command Headquarters, America's airborne leg of the nuclear triad. Today, Offutt Air Force Base, just south of Omaha, headquarters of the renamed U.S. Strategic Command, remains a high-priority target to degrade U.S. nuclear capabilities. Denver in Colorado finds itself close to NORAD, buried deep in Cheyenne Mountain. This puts it in danger in the case of a nuclear attack, but its large size and value as a blow to U.S. morale dooms it into the nuclear targeting list. Kansas City, meanwhile, has little strategic value, but as a large metro area, it's of moderate countervalue to a nuclear enemy. The constant and high-speed winds in the area also double down on the destruction. If you think America's nuclear sponge is going to keep you safe, think again. Prevailing winds would easily lift enough radioactive debris high enough into the atmosphere that it would rain down all across the eastern U.S. This is bad news for the Canadians as well, who happen to live next door to the biggest nuclear target in the world. Moving east into the Midwest, we find less targets of military value than other areas of the nation, but plenty of large countervalue targets in the form of large cities and industry. During the Cold War, the Soviets placed a premium on targeting Detroit due to its manufacturing industry. The Soviets saw Detroit as a critical American industrial hub, worthy of destruction via several nuclear strikes. Today, that value has plummeted significantly, but the city remains on the list due to being a large population center with some importance to the regional economy. Chicago, Illinois is of very high value to the enemy. The city is a major financial and transportation hub. From Chicago, aircraft from across the nation and beyond connect to destinations in the Deep South, the East Coast, and the West Coast. If you've ever flown cross-country, odds are high you landed in Chicago for a transfer. The city's also a major financial and industrial sector, and its location on the Great Lakes makes it a hub for trade. Much like Detroit in the Cold War, Chicago is slated for complete nuclear destruction via several independently targeting warheads. Indianapolis, Indiana is one of America's few large manufacturing centers left in the country. Its location also makes it a nexus for cross-country road traffic, with millions of road-based shipments passing through the city every year. Along the Mississippi, St. Louis, Missouri is a key trade and industry hub, as well as one of the largest ports along the mighty Mississippi. Much like in olden times, the Mississippi remains a critical trade artery for the United States, allowing for cheap transport of goods and raw materials to coastal ports in the South. Not just the city, but the river itself is slated for nuclear destruction via repeated attacks. This would choke one of America's most important trade arteries and poison the drinking water of millions of people. Chicago's rail nexus is part of the broader infrastructure slated for nuclear destruction in the war. One of America's most important rail junctions, Chicago's vast rail yards, are a primary target. However, a number of refineries across the Midwest make even smaller communities prime targets. Meanwhile, anyone near a major port on the Mississippi and Missouri rivers can expect annihilation as well. The American South is home to a bevy of critical military infrastructure, and this makes it one of the most targeted regions in the entire country, aside from the Great Plains' missile fields. Starting in Texas, Fort Cavazos, formerly Fort Hood, is a key target for destroying America's warfighting ability. The base is a key node in the American military's armored warfare, with training programs for mechanized forces and armor. Fort Bliss near El Paso likewise contains many armored units that the U.S. would rush to Europe in case of a war with Russia. It's also an important base for U.S. Army air defense training. Dyess and Lackland Air Force bases are both key targets as well. Dyess is home to B-1B Lancers and a key base for American air power. Meanwhile, Lackland is home to U.S. Air Force basic and technical school training, while also containing key elements of U.S. Air Force Command. This is not by accident. Located near the Mexican border, the base was once seen as more resilient due to being further out of reach of Soviet weapons, an immunity that quickly evaporated as ICBMs increased in capability. Louisiana contains one of the highest priority military targets in the nation. Barksdale Air Force Base is home to not just nuclear-capable B-52 bombers, but also a nuclear weapons storage depot currently being built by the Navy. This will restore a nuclear capability to the base that was consolidated around 20 years ago, a dire warning of the type of future the U.S. expects to face. Georgia contains 4 key military targets. Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base is home to America's Atlantic-based nuclear ballistic missile submarines. The Ohio-class subs dock here for rest and refit, making the facility critical for America's sea-based leg of the nuclear triad. Warner Robins Air Force Base, meanwhile, is a key logistics and maintenance hub for the U.S. Air Force. From Warner Robins, the USAF sends aircraft out across the Atlantic and receives them on their return. Fort Stewart and Fort Benning, meanwhile, are also key targets. Fort Stewart is the largest Army base that side of the Mississippi, hosting a large concentration of American firepower. Fort Benning, meanwhile, is a key training base for everything from new recruits to Rangers to America's airborne infantry forces. When they need to get parachute certified, other branches also send personnel to Fort Benning for training. Florida hosts MacDill Air Force Base, home to headquarters for both U.S. Central Command and Special Operations Command. Eglin Air Force Base, meanwhile, along the Panhandle, is a key testing and development base for the U.S. Air Force. Naval air stations in Pensacola and Jacksonville, respectively, are key training and operations hubs for U.S. Navy air operations. Meanwhile, Patrick Space Force Base and the Cape Canaveral Complex are vital for America's space-based infrastructure and home to its largest launch complexes. Along with a bevy of major cities all under nuclear threat, the American South is also home to critical infrastructure. Refineries all along the Texas coast are crucial for meeting the gasoline needs of Americans across the nation. Their destruction would cause a massive gasoline shortage that would cripple the American economy. Houston itself is America's energy capital and home to major port facilities. Likewise, Mobile, Alabama is home to another critical port in the U.S. South. New Orleans is not just a culturally significant target, but also a major oil infrastructure center. Atlanta, meanwhile, is a key node in U.S. transportation, and in Florida, Miami represents a major counter-value target due to its large population size. The American Northeast isn't just the beating heart of the U.S. government, but also of critical economic and military value. Starting right in Washington, D.C., the bulk of the federal government and White House makes it target number 1 in any counter-value targeting. However, the presence of the Pentagon also makes the city a priority 1 counterforce target. Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia is the largest naval base in the U.S. and home to America's Atlantic carrier fleet. The base is also critical for U.S. submarines and is the number 1 counterforce target in the entire U.S. Navy. Also in Virginia, Langley Air Force Base is home to a major fighter command, but even more importantly, a central hub in U.S. Air Force and federal agency intelligence operations. Langley is known as America's spy base for a reason, and of highest priority for nuclear destruction by the enemy. Quantico Marine Corps Base, meanwhile, is home to headquarters for the USMC and hosts its Officer Candidate School, as well as the FBI's Academy. In Rhode Island, Naval Station Newport hosts the Navy's Surface Warfare Officer School and Navy War College. While a lower priority target than bases hosting ships or aircraft, still of strategic importance to the enemy. In Connecticut, Naval Submarine Base New London and the electric boat shipyard are of extreme priority. New London is home port of U.S. attack submarines and a major research and development center for undersea warfare. New York, meanwhile, hosts Fort Drum and, well, New York City. Fort Drum is in the north of the state and is home to the 10th Mountain Division and a major component of U.S. force projection. New York City, meanwhile, is the beating financial heart of the nation. The destruction is of highest priority, not just for economic value, but to destroy America's morale and willingness to continue fighting. Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst is a joint Air Force, Army, and Navy base and major transportation hub for the U.S. military. Located in New Jersey, the base is slated for destruction along with the Newark port. A major port for shipping, Newark is also home to critical refineries feeding America's need for gasoline. The U.S. Army War College in Pennsylvania is a key target for destroying U.S. military leadership, but of lesser value than other counterforce targets. Philadelphia, though, is a top priority target, both due to its major industry base and sprawling shipyards. In Delaware, Dover Air Force Base is a high priority target due to its status as a major logistics and transport hub for the entire U.S. military. From Dover, the U.S. sends out its massive C-5 Galaxy aircraft and C-17 Globemasters, delivering troops, equipment, and supplies all over the world. Inbound aircraft from overseas are also frequently refueled and refitted at Dover. Maryland, meanwhile, is small enough and important enough to be almost entirely covered in nuclear fire. Fort Meade is home to the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command, making it an extremely high-priority target for destroying America's intelligence and cyber warfare capabilities. Aberdeen Proving Ground is critical for U.S. Army weapons development and testing. Joint Base Andrews, meanwhile, is of highest priority, given its status as home of Air Force One and a key hub for airlift of national leadership. In a decapitation strike, Andrews would be struck first to prevent U.S. leadership from fleeing the local area. Baltimore, meanwhile, is home to major port facilities and a key industrial target for undoing the American economy. With massive rail infrastructure, large numbers of refineries, and a key power grid and communication node, the American Northeast is slated for complete nuclear annihilation in the case of war. And with its destruction, you can expect the very infrastructure that underpins the American way of life to completely fall apart. You may not be directly harmed in a nuclear attack in the Northeast, but everything from your cell phone to local grocery store deliveries probably relies on either the physical or electronic infrastructure contained in the region. In a nuclear war, there is no safe zone, only different kinds of danger. And that's why a full-scale nuclear strike wouldn't just devastate the US, it would dismantle the country from the inside out. But if you think the explosions are the end of it, think again. Watch Can You Survive a Nuclear Winter to see if you'd last in the frozen post-apocalyptic wasteland. Or click on this video instead.